Conversations with Azu Ishekwele.
The House of Representatives and the Senate of the Federal Republic of Nigeria have ratified the state of emergency declared by President Bola Ahmed Tinubu on Rivers State against the groundswell of popular opinion. This is the subject of our conversation today on our weekly diary on life and politics, conversation with Azu. And today's topic is Rivers Emergency Rule, a different view. And Azu, the award-winning columnist, is here to express his variance of opinion with the popular opinion out there regarding the declaration of the state of emergency and the suspension of democratic institutions in Rivers State. Welcome to Conversation, Azu.
Thanks for having me, Julius. Pleasure to be here.
This is another demonstration of the inherent bad energy around godfatherism in politics. What lessons do you think, or do you think Nigerian politicians are learning any lessons from the adverse situation in godfatherism? For instance, the government of the immediate past governor of Edo State and his godfather. Soon after, we're having the same situation in Rivers State. Are we learning any lessons?
Well, I would like to think we are, but how the extent to which those lessons have been applied, there are lessons obviously people would have to confront lessons in life, but the extent to which that lessons you learn are then subsequently applied for positive benefit is entirely another matter. But you, in your intro, you talked about suspension of all, I think you said of all democratic institutions. I think the courts are still, the president made the point in his.
Well, because the courts are usually not elected.
Yes, but he made the point in his. The impression might also be, I'm sure that the impression might also be misconstrued. That the courts have also been shut down. But as far as we know, I think the courts are still were not affected by the proclamation of emergency in Rivers State. But as I said in my column, I think it's a sad day that any president, never mind the president, the current president, should ever have to contemplate on then proclaim emergency in any part of the country. It's a very sad thing. But we also have to keep in mind how we got to the place where we found ourselves. And this, as you know, is a problem that has been growing in the past 18 months. You know, the state has been literally ground to a halt. The citizens for whom government is supposed to function, at the service of which government is supposed to be, have actually just been spectators in the very sad drama that has been playing out in the past 18 months. And I think it was the escalation of all of that to pipeline explosion that was the immediate trigger for the proclamation of the state of emergency. So that's the context. I mean, where that state of emergency was proclaimed, that the state that had been there was almost, there's been anomaly in the state, if you like, for the past 18 months, which citizens don't really spectators, and then suddenly there was an escalation of the crisis a couple of days ago to a point where two pipelines were blown up in one day, 24 hours. The president felt compelled to intervene and act to claim emergency in order that the situation might be brought under control.
Now, to dive straight into the crux of your column, one of the different views you've expressed is that the president actually saved Governor Siminalayi Fubara from impeachment.
Yes, I think so. I think his intervention, whatever the debates may be in the public space, my suspicion is that the gentleman will go to a very quiet corner in his room and outside all of the noise and perhaps saved by the bell, if you like. Because you recall that the 27 lawmakers had already issued an impeachment notice and seemed quite determined to go ahead to implement it. In which case, if it had been implemented, the decision would have been irreversible. I don't think it would have had second chance or another chance to come back. But of course, the consequences of that, the counterfactual can also imagine. The consequences would really have been there, not just for the actors, but also for for the states and for the country, perhaps. So I think that the president's intervention, to be honest, I think it saved the government from impeachment.
In addition to that, the Supreme Court had literally grounded the government.
Correct.
Correct.
I mean, yes. I mean, the allocation, the local governments, the local government chairman,
election,
the local government election had been invalidated. The state's allocation had also been suspended because the Supreme Court was of the view that the budget was invalidly passed. All right. And so, and the lawmakers, the 27 lawmakers, by virtue of that, been reinstated in position. So, the governor, as of the time the emergency rule was proclaimed, the governor was just a lame duck.
And like in Edo before before Rivers, the governor had actually been in office without a functional House of Assembly. So, do you think the declaration of emergency actually saved the situation because the party already
absolutely. I think it did, and we must also remember how we got to the point where the State House of Assembly then became ineffective or inoperative. There were initial disagreements, as far as I understand, after the government was sworn in about speakership and all of that. And then the state government demolished the executive demolished the House of Assembly. And that really significantly escalated the crisis. And then things snowballed into defection and contestations about whether the defections were valid or invalid and so forth and so on. And it was just escalation from that point, from one level of escalation to the other. But at some point, the president, I think it was some point in 2023, called the parties to be dispute and try to resolve the matter. But that failed. That effort failed. The parties were just still bent on going ahead. And so,
one of the parties in this crisis is the Minister of the Federal Capital Territory, Nyesom. Do you think the situation would have been different in Rivers if Wike just faced his assignment as the Minister of the Federal Capital Territory and allowed Fubara to run an administration in Rivers State without?
Well, I have heard that argument made. Maybe not. I don't know what would have happened. But we also have to. There's also a context for the dispute between Fubara and the FCT minister. Right, the FCT minister, obviously, he's a serving minister, but he's legitimately from Rivers State. He cannot not be concerned about what is happening in the state because he's serving in the federal capital. No, I don't think so. I think he had, like every person from Rivers State and every Nigerian, had a legitimate interest in what was happening in good governance.
Politics is local.
Yes, no, politics ultimately is local. So I think it is ideal and very pretentious to say we just face one transformer. He is from the state, and all politics is local, and he had an interest and a stake in the state and in the politics of the state. And I don't see why people insist that he should face one place and then leave what was happening in Rivers State. How he and Fubara managed it, and whether the two of them could have managed it better, of course. I'm sure that this moment of pause that the proclamation of emergency rule has brought will give the parties, will give Minister Wike and the governor time to pause and reflect and hopefully reset, and then get back to the main point of serving the people of Rivers.
Yeah, people, commentators, opinion makers, lawyers, and all of that, who are drawing a parallel between the state of emergency declared and the northwestern states of Adamawa, Yobe and Borno
In
where
2013.
In 2013,
No,
where
no, no,
President
no,
Jonathan did
no,
not remove
no,
the
no,
governors.
no. I think that is a false equivalence. People who are doing that are
It's
making
incompatible.
yeah, I mean that, like comparing apples and oranges, to be honest. Because you recall that in 2013, when although President Jonathan had also been under pressure to remove the governors of the three states you mentioned, but I think the fundamental difference between what happened in 2013 and what we are witnessing is the fact that the governors were there was no evidence that the governors were complicit in the crisis. It was sectarian violence that was spreading to other states, and the president had to act to contain the crisis. And the governors had done the best they could, but they were not complicit. It's a different situation that we are faced with this year, where the governor himself is an active, is an actor, is the main actor in the crisis. How can you? How? I don't see how. I don't see how, as I said in my column, I don't see how you can extract the water of peace in rivers.
I'm breaking it.
Yes, and then you can't extract that water and leave the main actor in place. Else you risk breaking that coconut on the head of the innocent people of the state. No, the way to bring the thing to a point where the parties to the dispute can reflect, pause, and then reset is to is to act and act decisively. Of course, there has been a debate of the constitutionality of the president's action, whether Section 305 of the Constitution expressly permits him. Well, I do not. Yes, the section does not expressly permit it. But so, what? How do you deal with that sort of situation? How do you deal with it? How do you deal with it? You sit down because you see, it's if you do this, you are damned. You don't, you are damned.
Yes, because
right?
someone had referenced the doctrine of necessity, which was not a constitutional.
It was not a constitutional issue. So if you act, you are damned. If you don't act, you are damned. So the president had, in my view, to act and to act in a way that at least restores law and order so that we can begin to reset and then move forward.
All right, finally, after 6 months from now, there's Wike on one end, there's Fubara on the other end, there's the House of Assembly somewhere. If they don't resolve their differences within this period, what is the way forward?
Well, I would like to take an optimistic view and hope that this will be a moment of reflection for the parties involved and that the parties will resolve this, because it's almost 2 years gone for the government, and it's not a good thing for the people of the state that 2 years after the election, all that they have been faced with and are confronted with is just one level of crisis to the other. So I'm hoping that the parties to dispute will use this as a period of research and then get on with the business of serving the people, which is why the governor was elected to office. And I'm sure it will be the to greater pleasure of all the parties involved and to people if they can sit down and solve this problem and then move on. You initially you also talked about the National Assembly, and obviously there has also been a conversation about the voice votes and whether and all of those things. But I'm hoping also that in future, when sensitive votes on matters like this are taken, people can also go on the record as to what they do. But you see, the funny thing about politicians is that they always, we're always wiser after this. It's always a 50-50. I mean, after this now, the politicians who in their own time did not insist on, voting on record, are now the ones saying voting on record, not voting on the voice vote is the worst thing that could have happened. Whereas when they were there and when they had the opportunity to insist that the right thing should be done, they did not.
If you enjoy contrary views or different perspective to issues of national interest, visit azuishekone.com, where you will see an elaborately stated facts and counterfactual details of what is happening in the country right now, as opposed to popular opinion or people voting based on emotions or believing what they choose to believe, maybe out of ignorance. Thanks for coming on the conversation, Azu.
Thanks for having me once again.
Bye for now.
Conversations with Azu Ishekwene.